Another year, another veteran out the door is the only move the Packers make at the trade deadline. Why this year feels very different than last year.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts. You will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL to use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. My brain shut off there for a second. I'm not sure exactly what happened. and maybe Brian Gutekunst did too on trade deadline day. No, last year it was Rasul Douglas. But the Packers were in very different situations than they find themselves right now. This time 6-3. Now, Preston Smith to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 7th round pick. And there are going to be fans, perhaps you are one of them, who has a doom and gloom attitude about this. Well, the Packers were sellers and it is all they did yet again. I would like you to notice the Houston Texans in a very similar situation did nothing except sell off a backup defensive lineman. The Baltimore Ravens, they added Tre'Davious White, who was a backup corner for the LA Rams, a player who was so bad, former all-pro player, so bad he got benched by a team with no corners. Like they didn't really do anything. So let's just start there. This is not as big a deal as the name out the door indicates. Preston Smith, for a long time, was a very good, very useful player for the Green Bay Packers. And his tenure as a Packer is going to be remembered fondly by the fans. His sack against the Seahawks in the playoffs in that 2019 season sealed the deal. He was someone who came in with this incredible, historic class, the most money the Packers had ever spent in free agency in one off season. Zbiotics Smith, Preston Smith, Adrian Amos, and Billy Turner. And it was a paradigmatic change in the way that this front office operated, thanks to Brian Gutekunst at the helm. And then in 2020, he was not playing up to his potential, not in shape during COVID. And by the end of the year, Rashawn Gary was taking his snaps, was starting over him. And then he played, honestly, some of the best football of his career. 2021, Zbiotics Smith gets hurt. Preston Smith, so we're back in the mix here. And he's been a solid football player ever since. In fact, outlasted Zbiotics Smith in Green Bay, which if you had told fans after the 2019 season, if you had told me after the 2019 season, I would have told you was crazy. A terrific locker room presence. But the reason this is different, Rasul Douglas, when the Packers traded him, was like the second or third best, most important player on the defense. Preston Smith didn't even play 50% of snaps on Sunday against the Detroit Lions. We're talking about a guy who essentially has been reduced to backup level snaps. So yes, he's one of the 4 best edge rushers on this team. Edge players, not just pass rush. But as someone who is getting older, who is expensive this season and next, it's not surprising to me that the Packers said, look, this is a guy who doesn't really fit our scheme. He's 31 years old. Will turn 32 in November. I guess it is November. In just less than 2 weeks, we'll turn 32. and is not a great fit, has not been a great fit in this Jeff Hafley scheme, a 4-3 player who is clearly better suited to play in a 3-4 world, wanted to play more, and because the Packers wanted to get Lucas Van Ness on the field, wanted to get Kingsley Enagbare on the field because he was playing better, that just wasn't going to happen. This is not selling the way we normally think of as selling. Now, I understand the perspective of, well, all they did was get rid of a player versus get rid of a player and then also add a player. They did not do that. I kind of thought they would. And they had been calling, they had been trying to find an opportunity to add some pass rush in particular. I don't know that cornerback was ever really on the table here based on what I was told. I asked around about some of the players that were out there. Greg Newsome, for example. I don't think that was ever going to be a thing in Green Bay. But there were conversations that were had about pass rush help. I think if you look at what this Packers team can do, and you compare it to, say, what the Lions did. They add Zbiotics Smith. Well, that team, they had no internal answers for what to do on the edge. And this goes back to a conversation we had in August or July even, where I said, I think the Packers are more talented than the Lions because they have more answers at their questionable positions than the Lions. If the Lions can't get enough pass rush from Aiden Hutchinson, and they were getting enough pass rush from Aiden Hutchinson, they don't have answers on their roster to fix that. Well, now they have the same situation without Aiden Hutchinson. They have a worse player having to play that number one edge rush guy. Now, Ali McNeil has taken a little bit of a step forward. He has been one of the best interior pass rushers in the NFL this season. And so that helps. But they still have cornerback question marks. The safeties have been really good. As I mentioned, the defensive tackles have been really good. But the Packers have Rashawn Gary, who we've seen take over games as recently as last year. They have Kenny Clark, who is not having a banner season this year by any means. But I think the scheme, maybe more than anyone, is affecting Kenny Clark because of the way that they're deploying him. He's not getting a ton of one-on-one, let me just beat the guy in front of me matchups. It's a lot of, let me eat two so they can free up someone else. Do I think that's the best use of Kenny Clark? No, I don't. But we're talking about the 13th ranked defense by DVOA this season. I think the idea that this is somehow a terrible defense is just not true. I think there's some scar tissue from fans built in from years past. But this is a good defense. This is an above average defense. And when they're healthy with Jair Alexander, with Evan Williams, with Javon Bullard in the slot, with Keyshawn Nixon opposite, they played really good football. And I don't think Rashawn Gary just stopped being a really good football player. I don't think Kenny Clark just stopped being a really good football player. I think they will figure it out over the course of the season. They will find ways to get those guys in more advantageous situations. They just haven't done it so far because they're trying to figure this all out. They have answers where they have questions. Pass rush. They've invested in pass rush. Whether it's Carl Brooks, whether it's Kenny Clark, whether it's Rashawn Gary, whether it's Lucas Van Ness, whether it's JJ Enagbare, whether it's Devontae Wyatt, they've invested there. They have answers on their team, pedigree players, guys that we've seen be productive players in the NFL. They're not just hoping and wishing, praying and wish casting. Like we've seen Rashawn Gary wreck games. We've seen Kenny Clark wreck games. Those guys are still young players. It's not like they suddenly forgot how to play football. And a corner like Javon Bullard, he's their best slot corner. Jair Alexander and Keyshawn Nixon, they're fine. And I think Carrington Valentine being back in the rotation is a good thing for this team. Remember, they went to the divisional round of the playoffs and were one quarter away, really. Maybe one Zach Tom injury away from going to the NFC Championship game against a team that the last time they played them, they had beaten, with Darnell Savage at safety, with whatever was happening at linebacker, with whatever collection of safeties other than Darnell Savage they were putting out there that given week, whether it was Jonathan Owens or Rudy Ford or whoever they were trotting out there that day. You had Carrington Valentine at corner, Keyshawn Nixon in the slot, where I don't think he's a natural slot. They've added to this defense in a huge way. The secondary is playing much better football because the top four graded safeties in the NFL this season, two of them are Green Bay Packers. It's Evan Williams and it's Xavier McKinney. Now the other two are Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch, but their improved safety play, their improved speed at linebacker, whether it's improved play, I think reasonable people can disagree, but Edgerrin Cooper certainly, Edgerrin Cooper has already made more plays through 9 weeks than like Devondre Campbell had made through 9 weeks last year. That's just true. I don't view what happened at the trade deadline as selling the way that people are saying. But it is the case that they didn't add. They definitely did not add. And I think there are reasonable questions to be asked about that. And we'll ask them next on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Ultimate Pro Football GM. They are back and they are adding an amazing new game mode I need to talk to you about. The game that has you step into the shoes of a football franchise GM and lead it to glory now is a new head coach career mode. So on top of getting to build your dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring coaching staffs, now you also get to call offensive plays during games as well. Additionally, you'll dig the new tools you can work with, such as individual training camps and upgraded negotiation systems. This is a fun, realistic game that just got better. If you already have it installed, be sure to do an update so you can try out the new mode. If you don't have it yet, download it right now. It's a must-have for all football fans. I love it, and I know you will too. Ultimate Pro Football GM is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want. And here's a special offer for Locked On fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. Make sure to get it, as this perk will jumpstart your play and give you the advantage you'll want in creating a dynasty. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at the football board and selecting Jamar Chase, more than 79.5 receiving yards, and Patrick Mahomes, more than 1.5 passing touchdowns. Or how about Travis Kelce, more than 59.5 receiving yards, and Saquon Barkley for more than 79.5 rush yards. Those seem like easy ones. Easy peasy, right? We just saw what Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce did on Monday night, right? You saw how they are just unstoppable when they want to be. Yeah, I like their chances. Now they're playing a Broncos defense, but like, come on, it's Patrick Mahomes. It's Travis Kelce. Jamar Chase is playing the Ravens, and they can't stop anybody. That's the beauty of Prize Picks, is you get to win real money by using your football knowledge in a daily fantasy sports environment. You win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Sign up today and you can get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. Download the app and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get that $50 instant bonus when you play your first $5 lineup. You don't even need to win it. You just have to play it. Prize Picks. Run your game. All of this leads us to what I think is a reasonable question to ask. And that is, did the Packers do enough? When I look at the players who were traded, they were never going to get into the Za'Darius Smith market. That was over. I did have some fans reach out and say, hey, they should have been a player for DeAndre Hopkins. We talked about this before last season. I said that it made sense to me before last season. It didn't make sense to me at all this season. The Chiefs, much like what we talked about with the Lions, the Chiefs have no one at receiver. Rashee Rice is hurt. The other draft picks that they have spent, the capital that they have spent to get guys like Kadarius Toney, not even in the building, has not worked. Has not worked. They don't have like barely functional NFL receivers. They needed to make a move like this. The Packers don't. They have like 4 receivers I would rather see take snaps than DeAndre Hopkins, who, look, don't get caught up in the moment. Yes, he played well on Monday night against a terrible Bucs defense, a terrible group of corners, of secondary personnel outside of Antoine Winfield. And like, I like Zion McCollum, but like they were going after the other guy whose name you don't even know all night. And it's just like, it was just like easy, simple, like, hey, it's just a slant. That's the Packers we're just never going to do that. They don't operate like that. As much as sometimes when you're going up against a guy and you're like, oh yeah, Josh Hayes, we're going to just like kill that guy all night. The Packers have been known to do that. But they haven't gone against a team where that's the guy that you're going after. And also, if they did, they've got a bunch of guys who you trust to win that matchup. The Packers were doing that to Derek Stingley, a much better quarterback, with Romeo Doubs. So I don't find that compelling. Mike Williams was not going to change the outcome of this team. Yes, they moved off of Preston Smith, and they save money doing that, and that's part of this too. I don't look around at the moves made. Like Marshawn Lattimore, that was a lot. The Packers were never going to give up the amount of draft capital it required to go get Marshawn Lattimore in a situation like that. They just weren't. And I go back to this idea of what is the alternative? Well, the Commanders, they don't have anyone even close to as good as Jair Alexander in their cornerback room. They don't have anyone as good as Xavier McKinney or Evan Williams in their safety room. They desperately needed a defensive back upgrade. The Packers could use a cornerback 2, boundary corner, and depth. That's a little bit better than what they have. I think Eric Stokes and Carrington Valentine as your third boundary corners, totally fine. Find me the team that has a third boundary corner where everyone's going, yeah, that guy, love that guy. He's great. We're in great shape if that guy has to start 6 games. There aren't enough guys. So spare me some of the wailing and gnashing of teeth and rending of garments over some of this stuff. Like, it has gotten out of control in the last 48 hours since the Packers lost to the Lions. There are people out there acting like the world is ending, like this is over, like the Packers need to fire Matt LaFleur and play Malik Willis. Like that is the attitude, that is the tone, that is the stance from some people out there. And it just it boggles my mind. This team is 6-3. And even our pal Zach Cruz over at Packers Wire, who I think is really smart. He was saying, oh, well, what the Packers need to be Super Bowl contenders is A, B, and C. And it's like big things. Like they need someone to take a big step forward at corner. They need Lucas Van Ness and King Sandy Bar to take big steps forward. No, they don't. They don't. The Packers are 13th in defensive DVOA. Today, right now, this minute, 13th. And anyone on this team will tell you they haven't played their best. Jeff Hafley has said we're doing this sort of gradually. They only stumbled into their best defensive back grouping a month ago when it was clear Evan Williams needed to be the starter. You got Javon Bullard in the slot. Jair Alexander has been hurt. Now, those are things that I guess in a way could be foreseeable. Like Jair Alexander being hurt is something that you could have foreseen coming into the season. No question about that. But overall, I look at this team and I go, yeah, they have answers in the secondary. They have answers with their pass rush. Offensively, this is just stop tripping over your dicks. I mean, sorry to be crass, but like that's it. And I heard from a lot of Lions fans that I listened to your post game and it seemed like a lot of excuses. No. Beating yourself is not an excuse. It's not. It's not even, in fact, it's not even close to an excuse. It is, in a lot of ways, the exact opposite of an excuse. Because the whole point of saying the Packers have been beating themselves is to criticize the team for making those mistakes. You can't say they're beating themselves without acknowledging the inherent actions that are taken to beat themselves, which are the mistakes that we're talking about. The reason I have framed it that way is to say, I think with the exception of the Vikings did things to the Packers that were outside of the Packers' control. Like 2 of the interceptions that they got against Jordan Love, that's the defense making great plays. They had some really terrific offensive designs in the first half that put stress on the Packers defense. The Vikings just beat the Packers by 2 points. In the first game, it's penalties, it's missed tackles, it's slips, it's drops, it's blown pass protection assignments. It is things that the team themselves are doing. It wasn't anything the Eagles did that was anything special. And the same thing is true of the Detroit Lions last week. They didn't do anything schematically or physically that overwhelmed the Packers. The Packers outgained the Lions by 150 freaking yards in this game. It was one kind of fluky pick six and 2 fourth down touchdowns. Also kind of fluky. Those aren't excuses. That's the reality. You can't sustain over the course of the season if the only 2 offensive touchdowns that you score in every game are fourth down touchdowns. It's not going to work. That's not a thing. It's not a sustainable formula for winning. And a pick six in any circumstance is a little fluky because it involves not just the interception, but then the run back. So again, those aren't excuses, but it is a way of saying the 5 drops, the 2 Christian Watson misplays, those contributed more to the Packers losing than anything the Lions did. Jared Goff completed 2 passes over 10 yards in that football game. The Lions averaged less than 4 yards per carry in the game. So it's not like this was a dominant offensive or defensive performance from the Detroit Lions. 411 yards of offense. It was a penalty on 3rd and 3 makes it 3rd and 8. It was a drop on 3rd and 6 when the first down is all but assured. It's a drop in the low red zone on a slightly off target throw that at the very least you got to secure the catch. If it's a better throw, it's a walk-in touchdown. It is a wide open touchdown where you throw it behind the receiver instead of in front of the receiver, but the receiver should still make the catch. So you've got 2 bad plays. He's wide open. Chris Brooks was wide open for a walk-in touchdown. Dontavian Wicks, wide open for a touchdown. Jaden Reed on the pick six. If the Packers could have blocked that up and not blown the protection, which they did, they busted the protection. This wasn't, Aleem McNeil blew up the pass protection. No, they busted the protection. They didn't have the right guys. The coffeehouse blitz, they're not ready for that extra linebacker coming. Jaden Reed's wide open. So by scheme and by player talent, that's not the problem. And that's the reason why we bring these conversations up. So this reminds me a lot of some of the discussions we had around the 2020 and the 2021 teams. Those teams were good enough to win. They just didn't play well enough in the most important games. This season is still going to come down to how well this team plays in the most important games. They have the talent to do it. Now, one last thing on the trade deadline stuff. Brian Gutekunst has been precious about his draft capital in-season trading-wise. Why is he so willy-nilly with it on draft day? There is actually an answer, and we'll talk about it next on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. We've got NBA action to talk about this week. College sports, college basketball, college football, all kinds of cool stuff here. So just because the Packers aren't playing doesn't mean you don't have opportunities to get in on the action. And when you visit FanDuel.com today, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet, assuming you win it. That's it. Win the bet, $150. You get it. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Now for your second listen, go find Locked On NFL. Now 2 shows every day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso. Then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. I want to address a point our pal Wendell Fajeda brought up, that Brian Gutekunst is very stingy with his draft capital on in-season moves, but not stingy when it comes to the actual draft. That he's given up real assets to move up. You give up 4th-round picks, 2 of them, to go up and get Darnell Savage. You trade, by the way, the trade up for Jordan Love. Of course, no one brings that up. It was actually 2 4th-round picks to move up to get Jordan Love. They gave up future assets to move up for Amari Rodgers. They gave up 2 seconds to go get Christian Watson. What receiver in the NFL would you give up 2 second-round picks to trade for right now, today? So it's interesting. And I think this is a good point by Wendell. He's an astute observer of the NFL. And so I'm not surprised he made an interesting observation that Brian Gutekunst is way more cavalier with his draft capital at the draft than during the season for established NFL players. And I have long said that I think one of the inefficiencies in the NFL is trades like some of the ones that, like the Zbiotics Smith trade, frankly, where you are getting a distressed asset, an NFL player, for nothing. And interestingly, perhaps ironically, the Packers under Brian Gutekunst in many of the Aaron Rodgers years made free agent signings that mirror some of the kinds of moves that the Packer fans would have wanted during the season. The Rick Wagners, the Christian Kirkseys, the Dennis Kellys, the Devin Funchesses, where you're going, hey, let's take an upside opportunity on a player whose value is probably at its lowest, but who we've seen at least take and make plays in the NFL. They haven't done it at the trade deadline. And that is going to cause consternation for some people, I suppose. There are a number of reasons for the Packers, though, in particular, to not engage the way that I'm on the record as saying I think that more teams should engage. And I do think there have been and will continue to be opportunities for the Packers to get involved in some of these opportunities. It is weird to me that Zbiotics Smith, a premium position player, albeit a player I understand at getting up there in age, who has been productive this year, could be traded for essentially nothing. And we're talking about a fifth and a sixth, like that's nothing in the grand scheme of things for a premium position player. Like a starting edge defender. Every team in the league would trade a fifth and a sixth for a starting edge defender tomorrow. Someone with the pass rush upside and pedigree and experience of Zbiotics Smith. Now, do I think that there are, extenuating circumstances, culture fits, attitude things that could contribute to that value? Yes, of course I do. But the reason, if you're going to make the case for Brian Gutekunst, and I don't even need to set out to do it. I understand intuitively what's going on. The difference between what happens in late October, early November, and what happens in late April is certainty. Right now, today, the Packers are scouting college players. And they have reports on guys who were juniors last year, or maybe even sophomores last year, who are now seniors and juniors, who are draft eligible. And they have a pretty good idea of who some of these players are. And certainly by now, first week in November, we've seen, 6, 8, 10 weeks of college football? Not quite. And so you have an idea of who these players are. We know who the really good players in college football are right now. There's not going to be like a Joe Burrow. We'd already be seeing it if they were there. But the Packers don't know where their draft picks are going to be. They don't know the full scope of this draft. When they get to April and Brian Gutekunst has studied all the players, has seen all the film, has put together all the boards, and understands where the team needs are organizationally, because we're post-free agency, there is an inherent value to having all of that information, to knowing where you stand specifically. And so when you're trading draft capital now, what you're doing is trading against your record. Like a fourth round pick for the Packers. Fourth round pick is Romeo Doubs. Fourth round pick is Zach Tom. Fourth round pick is Evan Williams. That's a lot for the Packers. Now, a third round pick, you go, well, Tucker Kraft, Sean Ryan, those are nice players. But before that, it had been a problem for a long time. The Packers have not had a ton of first round hits. Lucas Van Ness, well, we'll see about that. Devontae Wyatt, no thank you. Not really a hit. A fine player, but not really a hit in the first round. Quay Walker, no way. Eric Stokes, no way. But you're just not going to give up first round opportunities if you're the Green Bay Packers. That's just not what they do. But in April, to move up 2 spots, you might go, look, we don't need the 112th pick and the 126th pick. We'd rather get to this other place. Now, the wisdom of that, look, I've said over and over, I struggle with the trade ups. I do think there has to be a certain amount of, we trust our scouting. We think this guy is so much better than everyone else that we want to go up and get him. And we don't think he could, like the Cowboys getting CeeDee Lamb. That seems, that's one of those, and it's easy to, Monday morning quarterback all this and say, you should have gone up and got that guy. He was wide receiver 1 in the draft class. There are just as often times when you move up because you're going, what does everyone else not see that we see? Or what does everyone else, see that we don't, depending on the case. It makes sense to me to say, when we have so much more certainty about what this draft class looks like, where it is strong, where our team is, where we value these players. You have a high first round grade on someone and they're still there at 26 and you've already picked. And you're like, well, we're not going to pick again for a while. And so you're going to move up. That makes more sense to trade draft capital for that. Is it still ideal process? To me, no, but I understand it. Versus, hey, we're going to trade this for Will Fuller. And by the way, it turned out to be a great idea not to trade for Will Fuller. It turned out to be a great idea not to get Chase Claypool, who, by the way, is not even an NFL player right now. That was 2 years ago. They tried to trade for Chase Claypool. He's not in the NFL now. Think about that for a second. And the Packers offered a second-round pick for him. They offered a second-round pick for Chase Claypool. He's not in the NFL. That's crazy. That's crazy. So don't get too caught up in the I wanted them to do something and they didn't, and so that is bad. That's not a thing. And there is a very clear and obvious distinction, to me anyway, between the decisions you make in the moment in the first week of November and the decisions you make in April. If the Packers could have made the Rasul Douglas trade in April instead of November, they would have. They would have waited. They would have tried to go beat the 49ers because maybe Rasul Douglas catches one of those ducks that Brock Purdy threw. If he's in the slot, the one that goes right to Keyshawn Nixon that he drops, maybe Rasul Douglas makes that play. And like he was, probably playing boundary if Nixon was out there. It doesn't matter. The point is, the Packers did not, at 3-6, think that they were going to be 9-8 and in the divisional round of the playoffs eventually. If they had thought that, they would not have traded Rasul Douglas. You have imperfect information in the moment, so you do your best to maximize value. You have much better information in April, which is why the stakes change. That, to me, that's the simplest explanation. Back tomorrow, Dr. Sam Wagner, who is a rehab specialist, works with Jordan Love, works with Jaden Reed, works with Dontavian Wicks. He's going to join us to talk about how players are keeping their body healthy. I'm talking about Jordan Love's injury. I'm talking about Jaden Reed putting on weight and maintaining stability in his body and trying to maintain all the explosiveness and all that good stuff. A really fun, interesting conversation coming tomorrow. The kind of conversation we'd only have on the bye week or in the offseason. So that's really fun. That's coming tomorrow. Follow me on all the social medias, Locked On Packers as well. I'm Peter_Bukowski everywhere you find the social medias, TikTok, Instagram, all that stuff. And then over on YouTube, we won't be live this weekend, but we will be live after the Packers beat the Bears next Sunday. So you can stay Locked On Packers.